Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Bible study. I am so excited for today's Bible study, y'all. Since we're in the month of December, I want to start the month off by talking about the wise men. I noticed something that I had never noticed about the wise men. But first of all, I just want to say, I hope everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving. I know I did. And also, I am a year older. I celebrated a birthday. And so I'm really excited about that. I've made it 46 years, and I have God to be thankful for that. But we're going to talk about the title of this. Oh, I keep getting emails coming through. But the title of this week's Bible study is Outsmarted by God. You definitely want to make sure that you stay all the way to the end. Even if you go back and watch the replay, I will be uploading this one. Hopefully it won't take that long to upload. But this is definitely a good lesson. And also, please do your due diligence and go back and study it for yourself. Yes, it's good to do Bible study, but it's also to go back, good and go back and study on your own. And so I was studying Matthew chapter 2, and we're gonna take this. There are a few verses that I want to talk about. This won't be a long Bible study, but it's definitely a good one. And I'm going to give you the revelation that I got, everything that God downloaded into me when I studied this. And so one of the things that I noticed while I was studying this is that I never knew why the wise men, like what exactly did they do that was wise. We're not going to talk about that right now, but I'm going to discuss it toward the end of the Bible study. But the insight that God gave me as to why that they're called the wise men is really, really simple. And I hope and pray that this Bible study just blesses y'all. So we're going to get started with verse 7. I see someone there. If you go ahead and just say hello in the chat, let me know who you are. I appreciate you joining the Bible study. Matthew chapter 2, verse 7. And please, like y'all, this is how I study the Bible. Like, you have to pay really close attention to what the Bible says, what the word says. So the very first verse says in Matthew 2, verse 7, it says, "Then Herod called for a private meeting with the wise men, and he learned from them the time when the star first appeared." So I want to talk about this very first verse. Herod was a king during the time when during Jesus's birth. And that's very important. And so he was calling a private meeting with the wise men. And in verse 8, it says, "Then he told them, 'Go to Bethlehem and search carefully for the child. And when you find him, come back and tell me so that I can go and worship him too.'" And so I want you all to think about this. Hey, Maisha. We're in Matthew chapter 2 today. We're talking about the wise man. And so listen to this, y'all. And as I read this, I thought about this. If the wise men knew about the star, why didn't King Herod know? I thought about that. He called for a private meeting. Remember in verse 7, he called for a private meeting with the wise men. And he learned from them the time when the star first appeared. And so the revelation that I got from that is that everybody can't see what you see. And I wrote beside that spiritual blindness. And I feel like when you're with God, God is with you. And so the wise men had access to privileged information that King Herod didn't have. And that to me was just like so important, because sometimes people will wonder why you know things and why you can see things and why they can't. And I think that King Herod was, well, I don't think that, I know that he was evil. And he didn't have, this is also the difference between knowing God and following him as well. I think, I didn't think about that at the time, but this is definitely a lesson in that. And as we go on, I also wrote down, the enemy does not know everything about you. Because think about this. He was telling the wise men to go and search carefully for Jesus, which means he didn't know where he was, and he told them to search carefully for him. I hope that I'm making sense, like to y'all. I hope this is like making sense. And so, as I stated before, this is just like a little bit of the backstory when Jesus was born. King Herod was pretty much afraid when it was announced that a king was coming. He thought that Jesus was going to take his place. He didn't understand that Jesus wasn't coming to be that type of king. And so when I read this with my spiritual eyes, and I was thinking to myself, why did the wise man see the star? Why did King Herod not see the star? And this is so important, y'all, because by the end of this, I realized that it doesn't matter what the enemy's plan is for you. God's plan is always going to prevail that plan, because he had plans to kill Jesus. So if you go back and read Matthew chapter 2, in verse 8, it says, he's telling the wise men to go out and search carefully for Jesus. It says, for the child. And when you find him, come back and tell me so that I can go and worship him too. Y'all, I'm going to read verse 9. Like I said, to worship him was a lie. His plan was to kill Jesus. And so when I got right here and I thought about his plan, I thought easily about how a lot of times people don't realize how sneaky and subtle the enemy is. Because right here, he had a meeting with the wise men. And he told them one thing, but he knew he was going to do something else. And so a lot of times the enemy, when we think about him, we think that he's going to do something that we can all see. But Jesus tells us in John 10:10 that the enemy comes to kill, steal, and destroy. Also, depending on what version you read, it says the enemy comes to kill, steal, and destroy. And so a lot of times people don't even understand that it's the subtleness and the sneakiness. Yes, and the conniving. Very sneaky and subtle. And that's why I want y'all to go back and read this story and go back and read it through a different lens. I've read this so many times, but I never noticed all these things until I started preparing for Bible study. And I was like, wait a minute. And here's one of the things that God revealed to me is that wisdom trumps sneakiness and conniving all the time. And remember, the devil is never going to be just straight out like he's always going to be subtle with it. He's always going to be sneaky with it. And a lot of times we don't notice how he is sneaky. He told the wise men that he was to find Jesus and he was going to go back and worship him, when he all along he wanted to kill him because he didn't want him taking over as king. And then it says in verse 9, and I need y'all to listen to me very closely. Like, if you're on here, don't stay here with me. It says, after this interview, the wise men went their way, and the star they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was. Oh my goodness. When I was like, wait a minute. So King Herod told them to search carefully for the child, search carefully for Jesus. They didn't have to do that. They did not have to do that. You know why? Because God went ahead of them. He led them right to baby Jesus. God guided them right to him. And so I got to thinking. I said, wait a minute. Imagine that if you let God lead or guide you, you won't be all over the place. They didn't have to go searching. They didn't have to go looking. The star led them right to where baby Jesus was. Now, going back to what I said earlier, if the star was seen by the wise men, why wasn't it seen by King Herod? If God led them to Jesus, why wasn't Herod led to Jesus? Sometimes God will hide you so the enemy can't find you. Even, listen to me. David said it in Psalms 20, I think it was Psalms 27. He will conceal me when troubles come. And as a matter of fact, we're doing Bible study on that next week. We're talking about enemy versus foes in Psalms 27. But we're going to go to it for just a second. Verse 5. Psalms 27 verse 5. For he will conceal me when troubles come. He will hide me in his sanctuary. He will place me out of reach on a high rock. And y'all, that just came to me as I was sitting here. Oh my goodness. I need y'all to really think about what I just said. King Herod was evil. He was evil. And so when you get to Matthew verse 12, so I went through Matthew verse 7, and I wanted to take my time and go through these. Matthew 7, Matthew 8, Matthew verse 7, Matthew chapter 2, verse 7, 8, and 9. And then I skipped to Matthew 12. And it says, when it was time to leave, this is so important, y'all. When it was time to leave, they returned to their own country by another route. For God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. This is the gist of why the wise men were wise, y'all. I sat here and I thought about this. God warned them in a dream. And think about this. This is a lesson for us too. God warns us, but it's up to us to listen. This is why they were wise, y'all, because they listened to God. We all have free will and choice. God reveals things to us sometimes through dreams, and it's up to us to like figure out, okay, what does this? That's why it's so important for you to remember your dreams when you dream. And not only that, if you go on to read further, God also warned Joseph in a dream. So a lot of times our dreams are from God and they're warning us about things. And listen, these things hadn't necessarily happened. So a lot of times our dreams, yes, write them down. Sometimes our dreams are warnings for us. Sometimes our dreams are warning what has happened in the spirit. It may have not happened naturally, but it may have happened in the spirit. So we have to We have to pray about those things. And here's the thing. If God is telling you to do something through a dream, then you better listen. You better do it. Also, the other thing that I got from this in verse 12, it says that they return to their own country by another route. Sometimes God doesn't necessarily take us the route that we think we should go. He took them a different route. Same thing, and this is how the Bible, to me, I feel like it's kind of repetitive, although it repeats the same. It may be different people, but it's the same thing. The people in Exodus, leading them out of Jesus, took them a different route. The normal route was 11 days, but he took them a different route. Said if they are faced with problems, they may not be able to handle them. I'm paraphrasing right there, y'all. And then here's the thing. If you go to Matthew 2, verse 16, it says, Herod was furious when he realized that the wise men had outwitted him. He sent soldiers to kill all the boys in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old and under, based on the wise men's report of the star's first appearance. So when you read that, it says that they were outwitted, that Herod thought that they were outwitted by, he was outwitted by the wise men. I don't think the wise men knew what he was going to do, but God knew what he was going to do. Because when you go back to verse 12, it says that he warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. So if God had not warned them, they probably would have went. So it wasn't the wise men that outwitted Herod. It was God, because he knew his plan all along. And this is the part, this is not a long Bible study, y'all, but this is good. Here's the thing. God knew Herod's plan all along. And he knows the enemy's plan for us too. This is what I got from that. But like Jesus, because Jesus wasn't killed. That was his plan, to kill Jesus. And so going back to John 10:10, where Jesus says the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And so a lot of times we're kind of like oblivious to how the enemy does how he does that. And this wasn't anything big. Yes, goes ahead. And when I read that, which I've read it several times, even in the case of the Israelites going out of Egypt, God went ahead of them. Even with David, God went ahead of him. And so a lot of times what that tells me is not to get ahead of God. And I think a lot of times, that's why the Bible says to wait. Wait. There's a reason why God tells us to wait. It's not just to wait, just to have us waiting. There's always a reason why. Because a lot of times we don't know what's ahead of us. We don't know what's around the corner. We don't know what's over the hill. But God does. Yes. And so the waiting sometimes, and I know it's hard to wait sometimes. I've been there, done that. But this is a good reason why we should wait. But think about this. I'm a very deep thinker, and I'm always like thinking about, okay, well, what if they wouldn't have done this? Because here's the thing, go back to the wise men and the dream that God gave them. What if they had said, what if they hadn't paid attention to that dream and just said, oh, we just gonna go back the way we came. We gonna just go back the way they came. What if they would have done that? What if they would have went back to Herod? What if they would have ignored God's warning? Because guess what? It's some people that did that, and they're called Adam and Eve. And look what happened. Look at the mess we in right now. Yes, the waiting season is so hard, but I can tell you this, Maisha, if you meditate on a lot of the scriptures that tell you to wait, and then also if you look at all the people who had to wait, now it's not going to tell you, oh, they waited, but if you look up, okay, if you just start from Genesis, we'll start with Sarah. She had to wait. She had to wait on God, right? God promised her a child. She had to wait. Now, she didn't wait. She rushed the process. And look what happened. Look what happened. She created an Ishmael. She created an unnecessary problem for herself. And not that the child is unnecessary. That's not what I'm saying at all. But she created an unnecessary situation all because she got impatient, she had doubts, and she didn't wait. And this is all that the Bible is doing with us, y'all. It's just teaching us. This is why a lot of people think that the Bible is not relevant. But we're supposed to look at these people's stories and see we can learn from them. Romans 15 verse 4. We learn from them what to do and what not to do. Yes, that was another one right there. He waited for her, but also she had to wait to have a child too because she was barren. She couldn't have children. So sometimes we have to wait for whatever it is that God is going to birth through us. It could be a ministry. It could be a marriage. It could be a business. It could be a career. We don't know what it could be. And so if sometimes the waiting like isn't punishment, it's preparation. Is preparation for what's to come. Like I have been waiting on something for so long. I don't know when it's going to happen. But you know, one thing is that have I gotten weary? Yes. And when I start feeling that way, I have to go back and wait on, get in the word. And I have to be like, okay, David waited. He was anointed king at 16 years old, but he didn't become king until like he was 30. That's a long time. That's a long wait in between the prophecy and the God's prophecy and his fulfillment of the promise. That's not the word that I was necessarily looking for. So that's one reason why he can tell us to wait and wait patiently. And I was just telling somebody this a few weeks ago, that not only does God tell us to wait, but he tells us how to wait. And I think I've mentioned that before too. And so I wrote this down because I felt like this too. Like how many times have you felt like God was trying to warn you, but you didn't listen to that little voice whispering to you? God warned them. And unlike Adam, because they listened to him. If you go back to Genesis, it said that that God warned him that they could eat from every tree in the garden except. And in that situation, they were outwitted by the serpent. And they were outwitted because he disguised himself as something that looked normal to them. A snake belongs in a garden. So They weren't um surprised is not the word that I'm looking for there. But they got outwitted by him. And this is a constant theme throughout the Bible. He uses familiar things. Familiar. There's no way he could have gotten close to Jesus, as close to Jesus, the way he did, unless he inserted himself in Judas. When I say that, I mean gain access to him. And essentially, all King Herod was the enemy trying to disguise himself as somebody who wanted to go and worship him. When we know that ain't what he had in mind. He said, so I can go and worship him too. Which means that everybody who's saying that they're worshiping God ain't worshiping God. So God essentially outsmarted King Herod. It wasn't the wise man. He used the wise man. And this is how God works in and through us. And this is why his plans cannot be thwarted. His plans cannot be stopped. Whatever it is that God has planned for your life, remember, it cannot be stopped. If y'all don't hear anything else that I say, however, you can let the enemy delay you. But when you learn things like this, you can start to see, okay, wait a minute. This is just a plot of the enemy. And sometimes it might be us, and sometimes this is where relationship with God and discernment has to kick in. And this is how we make wise decisions. This is how the wise men were wise, because they're not really talked about that I know of. And I was sitting in my closet when I was writing out my notes, and I was like, well, I know that they're mentioned in Luke, because Luke and Matthew and Mark, they kind of tell the same story, but they give the story through their own eyes. I don't know if Mark covers it though. I think it is covered in Luke, but I don't know about Mark. So, and I kept thinking to myself, okay, why are the wise men wise? Why were they wise? Why were they called that? This is why. All they did was listen to God. They let God lead them. This is the first thing that God said. This is what he broke it down to me. This is what I felt in my spirit. They are wise because for the first thing, they let me lead them. They didn't say, no, I know the way. I got it. We don't need God's help. They let God guide them. They let God lead them. And here's the thing. I feel like in order for them to do that, they had to have a close relationship with God. And they had to be, not only that, they had to trust him. And so a lot of times we quote Psalms 23 verse 1, the Lord is my shepherd, but is he? Is he guiding you, or are you guiding you? Yes. Yes. Are you guiding you, or is God guiding you, or is God leading you? And this just goes to show that God does not force anything. He doesn't force anything. The Bible talks a lot about leading and guiding. I've not heard anything about force. And that leading and that guiding is for your own good. It's for our own good. And there are times when I want to lead and guide myself. There have been times when I have done that. And, it didn't work out, y'all. It did not work out. And so there are so many lessons that we can learn from the wise men. But those two right there just stood out to me. They let God guide them. They trusted him. Because in order for you to let somebody lead or guide you, you got to trust them. It shows that they trusted God. They truly trusted God. And then when he warned them in that dream, they listened. They listened. And it's just as simple as that. And so they did not have the Bible like we have it right now. And so God gives us a lot of warnings through his word. And I think I actually did a podcast episode on it, but something came back to me that God giving someone like he warned people through the prophets. Because you go back and study a lot of the prophets, they told the people what God said, and the people didn't listen. And then another way that he warns us is through dreams. Several people got warnings through dreams. Even Joseph got warned. He told Joseph, get up. You need to go to Egypt with Jesus and Mary. Joseph listened. So, and it's just as simple. It's simple. I feel like it's simple when we're talking about it, but to actually do it, I think, sometimes it's hard for people. And that's just obedience. That's all it is. And so I thought that was a really good lesson about why the wise men were wise. Because we don't know anything else about them. Because after they took Jesus them gifts, they went on back home about their business, and we didn't hear anything else from them. We don't know anything else about them. Am I right? Now I may have missed something. Yes. The hard part is knowing the voice of God versus your own voice. Yes, that's it, Maisha. And I can tell you this, the closer you stay to him, the more you'll start to realize it's his voice. And you won't have to second guess. But it can be hard sometimes, especially definitely in the beginning for me. And I'll be honest with you all. I did struggle with not necessarily hearing God's voice, but doing some things that he wanted me to do. And so I made excuses, and I was like, surely this can't be God. This is me. And then I realized it can't be me because I don't want to do it. And so a lot of times when you have this voice continuously telling you to do something, and if you're not a spiritual person, then it may sound like I may be crazy, but I just know before I got closer to God, I didn't hear these things. Like, tell this person this, or sometimes he'll give you a word to steward, and you and I just talked about this, Maisha. And sometimes you just have to do it, and you may feel silly, you may feel weird, and that's a lot of times how you know it's not you, but it's God. And you never know what that other person may be going through, but God does. And so a lot of times if he gives you a word, in the beginning, it was hard for me. My stomach would turn in knots, y'all. Would turn in knots. I was like, these people gonna think I'm crazy. And then after a while, I just kind of got like, well, somebody probably think I'm crazy anyways. I said, better be crazy for God than anything else. And that's just what you have to do. Like, I feel like it's absolutely, like, I feel silly sometimes with some of the things that God tells me to like share. And I'm like, It's not me, you know. And then I'll share it, and then somebody will be like, okay, I had been thinking this, or I had been feeling this, and I don't want to say that it gets easier, but it gets better for you to do it. You just be like, okay, well, you know, I'm just gonna do what God told me to do. hmm Um, I want to talk about. I said next week we're gonna talk about enemy versus foe, and that's gonna be coming from Psalms 27. But the following week, I would like to talk about development, commitment, and versus development, because I feel like there are so many people that are afraid to do what God has called them to do because they feel like they're not qualified enough. And I've touched on this a little bit, but I want to explain it from a different perspective. Something that I saw in Matthew again, because I don't know why, but God led me to study Matthew again. And so I got fresh eyes on it. And there are so many things that have popped out from me just studying it in the last 2 days. And so I got a couple of things. But like I said, I hope and pray that if you listen to this Bible study, the one thing that I want you to get is that God's plan cannot be stopped. I don't care, like, and remember Jeremiah 29:11. I know a lot of people like to quote it, but it's true. Nobody can stop. And I'm just going to tell you my little testimony before I let y'all go. And Maisha, you probably know this because you've been with me for a while, where I had the job that I have right now, y'all. I tried to get this job like 2 years. I had 2 people to say that they were going to help me, didn't help me. Finally got in the door, applied for 2 jobs, 2 different positions, I would say. Didn't get those positions, thank God. Applied for 2 more positions, I think within a year later. Got both of the positions. So I ended up having to choose. Which one I wanted. I didn't know what to do. I prayed about it, chose the one I chose, and I'm so thankful that I did. But this is what happened, y'all. I had some references, 3 people as references. And by the time when I got through, did the interview, got the job, the lady who hired me, she said, you need to change your references. And I was like, huh? She said, you might want to change your references. Now, y'all know, at this point, you know, I can discern. I didn't need to ask her any questions. That just let me know somebody gave me a bad reference. Because why else would she tell me to change my references? And so I thought about it, and I was like, there's 3 people. I was like, who did it? I don't know. And so I was like, I'm just going to change everybody. And so one of the people, they started acting strange. And for the life of me, I could not understand. I was like, why is she acting weird and strange? And lo and behold, I kid you not, y'all, God revealed it to me. She was the one that gave me a bad review. I never said anything to her, but it was duly noted. It was noted. And so then I started thinking about, in hindsight, some things that this person had said. And I said, oh, I invited them to something. And the response they gave me, it kind of threw me off, but I didn't think about it too hard because I'm a pretty happy person. And I was like, oh, if she can't come, she just can't come. But for a split second, I thought about what the person said. I was like, that just didn't come across right. And so, but I let it go, y'all. But her plan didn't work. Her plan did not work. And I'm going to tell you this. There have been so many things that have happened to me that have not worked. I could go through a whole bunch of things that have happened to me. That's why I can sit here and say and say it with true conviction that whatever the enemy has planned for you is not going to work. God never said the weapons wouldn't form. He said they wouldn't prosper. And that's why we're going to talk about Psalms 27, because I was reading it and I was like, I read verse 2, then I got to verse 5, and I was like, like I need something started clicking. And I said, we need to talk about that. We need to talk about enemy versus foe, because you need to know the difference between an enemy and a foe. And you also need to understand what verse 2 means and what verse 5 means. I think it's verse 5. So we're going to talk about that next week. And I think once you all understand when David was writing and how he wrote and how he was so honest with God, it's going to help you kind of understand a lot more of the Psalms as you read them. Because it may seem like he doesn't have faith. But when in actual reality, he's talking about his reality versus God giving him revelation. And so we need to talk about that, because things do happen to us. God is all throughout the Bible. God is not going to shield us from things happening to us. But he does promises to rescue. He does promises to restore. He promises to redeem. He promises to renew. See, I think about all these things all the time, and I find verses on them. And these are not just words, y'all. These are God's promises. Covenant means promise. That's always in the back of my head. And I just think about every single time God has shielded, has concealed me, has shielded me, has rescued me, and has protected me from people that are trying to do me harm, especially when I haven't done anything to them. And that's the thing. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is just sit back. David didn't do anything to Saul. He could have. He could have. And I need y'all to think about that. If you all ever read any of 1 Samuel like 23, 24, like those are like where David is being chased in the wilderness. He was chased by Saul and his son, and they both ended up unalived. And David didn't do anything. David actually didn't want his son to be unalive. But he had several opportunities to unalive Saul, and he didn't. He let God take care of that. So I don't worry about anything that anybody tries to do to me. And you don't have to worry about that either. I promise you. Now I can sit on here and talk for a little bit longer about some more things that have happened to me. But yet I'm still here. I'm alive. I'm well. I'm living in peace and joy. Do I still have problems? Yes. But my problems don't have me. That's my favorite line. I got problems, but my problems don't have me. But they're minor. They're minor issues compared to everybody else. Compared to some people, not everybody, but compared to some people. And so when you know this, and when you trust it, and when you believe it, It may not feel good in the moment, whatever you're dealing with. But remember, God is with you. Oh, I will be going to watch it too, Maisha. He is one of my favorites. Him and Joseph are my favorites. But I want to say this to you all. One thing that will help you also as you're studying the Bible is find your Bible like avatar. Like find your Bible person that you like, okay, this person sounds like me. This is who I am. And one of the reasons you should do that, and this is one of the things that my pastor suggested, is so that you won't feel weird when it's time to carry out your calling. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in the commitment and the development Bible study. We'll talk about that because I think so many people think, oh, I gotta know everything. I gotta be the first, and I'm just gonna give you a little bit. The first thing that God wants to be able to do is trust you. That's the first thing. He has to be able to trust you. And a lot of times that people don't get that. God needs to be able to trust you, like even like entrusting you with a lot, entrusting you with his people, entrusting you with whatever it is that he's given you. Like, because if he gives it to you, it's for a reason. So I just want y'all to be thinking about that. I've questioned myself time after time, like, God, why me? There are so many people out there who I feel like do a better job of teaching Bible study, who do a better job of speaking. But here's the thing. Maybe it's something that God wants me to reach certain people. I don't know. And it may be the same with you. And so that was one of the things that I kept worrying about in the beginning, is that I don't qualify. I'm not this. I don't have this. I don't like, and that's not even the first thing that God cares about. And I'm going to show you all that in scripture. It's not just something I'm just telling you. I'm going to break it down to you, and I'm going to show you in the word that that is not his first priority, is you being developed. He does want you to develop whatever skills it is that and whatever he wants you to do, but that's not the first requirement. And I really think the first requirement is trust. And we're going to talk about that. And I feel like the sooner some people like get that, or they understand that, then I'm not going to say that it makes it easier for you, but it does take some of the weight off. And you don't have to be or try to be this perfect person or pretend to be somebody that you're not. I can only do what I know how to do. I'm this little country girl from this little small town, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with who I am. And I like being me. But it is 6:50. I'm not going to keep y'all any longer. Please make sure you go back and study Matthew chapter 2, verses 7. I'm just going to go ahead and say verses 7 through 16. I didn't want to go through all of that. I just kind of, plucked out all the things that kind of stood out to me. But it is a great story with a lot of good lessons in there. Oh, the one thing that I didn't go over this verse, but I want to end with this. In Matthew chapter 2, verse 10, it says, when they saw the star, they were filled with joy. It's talking about the wise men. They were filled with joy. Yes, they were filled with joy. Now, contrast that with King Herod. That's not what he was feeling. First of all, he didn't see the star. But imagine in my Bible, it talks about him worrying. He worried about something, and he was worried about the wrong thing. And that's one reason why God tells us not to worry, because a lot of times we end up worrying about the wrong thing. And he went around, he killed those kids for nothing. All because he was worried about. And here's the thing. Ooh, this just came to me, y'all. When God puts you in a position, you won't have to worry. Because King David never worried about being dethroned. He never worried about it. So when God sees you in a position, you don't have to worry about anybody coming and taking it from you. But that was his word. He was worried that Jesus was going to take his throne. That's another lesson. This just came to me. So that means we don't have to worry when it's God given, can't nobody take it away. Can't nobody take it away. But he was put in his position by humans. Clock it. As the young people would say, clock it, whatever they be saying. But yeah, can't nobody unseat you where God has put you. And we're going to end it on that note. Next week, I hope to see you all. We're going to talk about enemies versus foes. And we talking about that because I once wondered, like, what's the difference between an enemy and a foe? Ain't they the same thing? That's what I asked myself. And so, of course, I'm going to break it down. We're going to break it down. I'm going to explain what an enemy is and a foe is. And we're going to know what to do about both. We know I just talked about a little bit about what a foe would do when I gave y'all that little testimony about what happened to me. But we're going to go a little bit more in detail, and I'm not going to hold y'all long. But all right, y'all have a great rest of your week, and I will see y'all next Tuesday. Enemy versus foe. Be here, 6 p.m. Eastern time. Y'all have a good rest of your week, okay?